This is Speedy Willie, and I'm world class. I like running, but I love to get the pass. I practice all day and dance all night. I gotta get ready for the Sunday fight. Now, I'm as smooth as a chocolate swirl. I like to dance a little funky, so watch me, girl. There's not one here that does it like me. My Super Bowl shuffle will set you free. This is the Community Solutions Podcast. Jason Bradley, Andrew Richter. I think I just gave that one away.
I think you did. It did kind of sound like this. Now, I have to ask this question because, that's one of my favorite teams in all of sports history.
Get out.
I'm not sure that you're ever going to have a team with as many characters.
Oh, I know.
Starting from Mike Ditka on down and Jim McMahon on down. But
the fridge, yeah.
Who specifically was singing that part?
What's his last name? Willie.
I could pretty much name the entire team.
All right, who? Start naming their receivers.
Willie Gault.
Yeah, it had to be Willie Gault.
Oh, it was Willie Gault.
Yeah, it had to be Willie Gault.
I think the entire starting defense I could probably rattle off.
The starting defense, you think so?
I think so. I mean, the defensive line.
Singletary.
He was in linebackers with Otis Wilson and Wilbur Marshall.
Yep.
Then you had
Richard Dent.
Fridge, Dan Hampton, and Mongo McMichael on the line. And I know Duerson and Fensick were the safeties. And maybe I can't name the corners. I thought I could, but it's escaping me now that I'm on the spot.
Right. That's how it happens.
And I do remember, Jimbo Covert and Van Horn on the offensive line with Peyton McMahon. Matt Suey was the fullback. McKinnon was the tight end.
Yep.
Gault and God, now I can't think of the other receiver, but I got about 70% there.
That's not bad.
I couldn't name that on the Vikings. I absolutely couldn't.
That year or any year?
Pretty much any year. Maybe the 98 team, maybe I could name, but I don't, other than that, probably not. So I think when you take ability, it amazes me that team won only one title. Yeah. When you really think about, I think McMahon getting hurt all the time was what, not having the great quarterback separated them from the 49ers, and there's so many great teams. The NFC was so stacked back then. But 85 Bears will go down as one of the single greatest seasons. And one of the greatest moments of the season, the Monday night game that they lost against Miami, watching Dan Marino shred their defense. Yeah. Because one of the little-known things about that was that everyone thought there was going to be a rematch in the Super Bowl. And New England,
their first Super Bowl,
upset Miami in the AFC Championship game, creating a dud of a Super Bowl. Right. But had the Dolphins gone, I think you'd have had a really tough Super Bowl. Yes. Not a 46-10 blowout. But, I mean, the game was a joke, but it'd been interesting to see Miami play them again, but we were denied that. Yeah. Yeah, it's conspiracy. Even back then, New England, it was conspiracy. Right. It was the old two-headed coin again. Both were heads.
Yeah, that was back in the day when McMahon was so good that the Vikings weren't able to get him yet. That happened in what, 1997?
93, I think. Yeah. No, by then, remember McMahon was on he was Favre's backup when that was the last game of his career, was the Super Bowl against the Bledsoe Bill Parcells New England team. Right. Back, I was in college then, and that was McMahon's last game. Yeah, is there a team that brought in more retread quarterbacks than the Minnesota? They were kind of like the Twins. Kinda. They'd bring in the Twins bring in a guy who threw it 96 miles an hour 7 years ago, and said two Tommy John since then, and that's who they go after for free agents. And the Vikings are kind of the same. They get Warren Moon when he's 43 years old.
We're bringing Franco Harris back.
They get Moon when he's 43, and they get Jeff George at the end of his career, even though he did have one good year here.
He did, yeah.
Randall Cunningham, Bubby Brister. Gus Frerotte. I mean, you name the quarterback. The Vikings had him when they were 39.
Yeah.
They retired in a Viking uniform.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, and then some guys like Rich Gannon, they jettisoned too quickly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they have not managed that position well, I don't think, ever. There's probably been. I started watching football. The 85 season is the first year I remember following the NFL week to week. I was 8 years old. I remember the Miami 49ers Super Bowl the year before. Montana Marino, and Marino was really, really young. Second or third season, I think he was in. I think he was a second. And the Vikings have probably had, so that's 34 years now?
Yeah.
They probably had 60 starting quarterbacks.
I don't know if they've had 60.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Sean Salisbury,
Yeah.
Spurgeon Wynn, Todd Bowman,
Yeah.
Dante Culpepper,
Yeah.
Wade Wilson, Steve Bono. Remember, he started here.
Yeah.
You can go right on down the line of I obviously there's, again, now that I'm on the spot, Brad Johnson.
Mm-hmm. Twice.
Yeah. Of course, Favre. Sage Rajafields or whatever his name is.
Yeah.
I don't remember his name. Doesn't matter. But I mean, they've had so many starting quarterbacks. It's 60 is exaggerated. I bet it's 40. I would bet that it's 40.
It's possible.
So,
yeah, I don't know. Definitely since Fran Tarkington left. Well, I mean, Tommy Kramer was with the team as their starting quarterback for a long time.
For a while in the 80s.
And he was definitely better. He looked really good because he had to go up against Don Mikowski twice a year. So.
Oh, gee. Well, he had one good year, too, 1989. Well, yeah, I mean, it's... I no longer care. If they'd moved to Antarctica. Subject today actually involves them a little bit, which we'll get into in a minute.
Yeah, don't worry. It's not going to be all sports. No. We're going to get into the seedy underside of sports by mixing it with politics. Yeah. It's going to be really good.
But it's still, the Vikings could move to Antarctica and it wouldn't bother me. Well, that's just me.
They might win a few games in that environment.
They might.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, we're going to get into how sports and politics kind of, how Minneapolis and other big cities have screwed that up big time.
You know what? I got the Super Bowl shuffle now in my head. And I'm just
see,
man, they call me the fridge, and I'm a rookie. I might be big, but I'm no dumb cookie.
That's the other verse I was looking at using. So I had it down to those two. But if you want to listen to that, you can kick on out to our Community Solutions music from the podcast playlist out on Spotify.
I might have to figure out how to do that now.
Well, you just might. You just might have to figure that out. So, but before we do that, we're going to hit the local lowdown here. We got a couple of things we want to talk about. First, why don't we start with some good news?
Good news.
We don't do enough good news. There are so many problems out there that we have to let you know about and how to tackle them. And this is not one of those. We want to brag a little bit on our, where we got our start. I mean, this is, it kind of helped to put things in action a little bit. We just saw recently, according to that Crystal, Minnesota, the Star Tribune put out an article that ranked it number 2 on the Star Tribune's Hot Housing Index for 2018.
Really?
Yeah.
You selling Jay or something?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. This has, this is good news. I mean,
what are the metrics this is based on here?
Well, they look at the median days that it's been on the market, the median sale price per square foot are a lot of the two big metrics that they use, and they kind of looking back like since the last recession, how it's done, and that's kind of when we started getting involved in things, and we've seen drastic shifts in that city. I mean, whether it is seeing, the
is there like amount of foreclosures or something that they base that on?
I don't think they looked at that.
Okay.
Not according.
Doesn't matter. We'll brag anyway.
Yeah. So there were 108 communities in the hot housing index, and Crystal was number 2. And they looked at cities with 75 sales or more last year.
Okay.
So there was that criteria. You're not going to have some small town where nobody bought or sold, or not that they're not great places to live. Just, they're looking for some action in the market. Mm-hmm. So that goes back. I don't remember the number of the podcast, but I remember that that Tom Slupsky and Kim were
Edwards,
in here.
Yes,
Kim Edwards were in here.
It was about a little less than a year ago.
Talking about how Crystal was one of the forthcoming real estate communities in the Twin Cities area.
And a great buy for the money and the commute and all that kind of stuff. Just get them on a CD5, and I mean, that would just think, Jay, you're like 5 blocks away from getting something like that.
Oh, yeah, I don't know about that. But you know what? It just goes to show. I mean, you start to have, your empty housing supply begins to get bought up. You have some new development. You have your commercial real estate getting leased out and businesses in there and what that does for a community.
And not, in Crystal anyway, not being subsidized by the government or special favors or things like that. It was old-fashioned capitalism going on there. Notice Crystal's a hot housing market. I don't see Robbinsdale or New Hope or Golden Valley or any of those cities bypassing.
Right. Well,
coincidence? I'm sure.
Yeah, well, Crystal, I know, has gotten rid of a lot of regulation as well. It's become one of the most free or more free places.
How about the housing inspections thing, getting rid of that and the extra money that put on sellers and buyers to do that.
So good news. Good work over there, guys. So
now back to the depressing
back to the depressing news. We're going to talk about St. Paul, who's almost as bad as Minneapolis, but this
That'd be
is
quite an
from
accomplishment if they were as bad as
from the
Minneapolis.
Pioneer Press. They voted, the city council voted Wednesday to assemble a task force. Our favorite thing, Andrew, that a task force for the right reasons is good, like in Crystal, getting rid of regulation. A task force for the wrong reasons, whether it be for figuring out how to build more bike paths, or in this instance, in St. Paul, how to get rid of 4 large murals that loom over the council chambers in the city hall / courthouse.
Why do they want to get rid of these here, Jay?
Well, because they're too white.
Oh. I thought they were Christian or something like that.
So here's what these murals have. They depict white men, and this is according to the Pioneer Press. They depict white men, an explorer, a riverboat captain, a railroad surveyor, and a laborer. And they're standing over similar images that include black dock workers, black railroad porters, and Native Americans assisting white men who are in the process of being converted to Christianity.
God, those damn Christians again. I mean, we can't have that up there. Come on. You don't support this?
No.
What is it with because they go on to say in this same article that council members does not reflect the current values nor the present day narratives and lived experiences of people of color, Native, and Indigenous, in other words, Indian, people who live in St. Paul. Says who?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the line.
Task force.
This is the line that I really loved. That Council members said they send the wrong message for modern times, especially as visitors plead with the council on serious issues, including the fates of their homes and businesses. Yeah, they're all protesting these paintings. We take these paintings down, boy, we've made progress.
Oh, they're not going to take them down.
Well, they're not taking them down.
Oh, no. So here's what they're going to do. They're going to rotate other pieces of artwork in front of them, two at a time, without altering the existing artwork.
You know, let me ask a question. What is it with trying to censor history? You know that I'm on a Dukes of Hazzard binge. I mentioned this because I discovered this thing called Amazon Prime. And you know how that was taken off the air because of the Confederate flag being painted on the General Lee.
Right.
Which I think is just the dumbest thing I've ever heard. If there was ever a non-racist show or family or anything, if you watch the Dukes of Hazzard, you would not get a hint of any, even though this is a show from 35, 40 years ago where the standards were completely different.
Yeah.
You know, you watch a show like Good Times, and you could argue that's very stereotypical of black families. I don't think that that's true. No. But you could argue that. And to take that off the air because of a car is just what is it with history that we can't look at or deal with? I mean, why can't we show this stuff? And also, these rich white men who wrote the Constitution also wrote the mechanisms to change the mistakes they made. Yeah, they did. I mean, let's not forget that for a minute. Amending the Constitution was something that the Founding Fathers understood was a necessary mechanism to put in there. Yeah. So how does censoring something, because that's what this is. This is censorship. Yes. This is saying you can't, your First Amendment freedom of expression doesn't exist here. How is that a solution to, if anything, it goes the opposite way? If anything, it's fascist to do something like this. Yes, I'd agree with that. So what is to be gained by this? I don't know. I mean, going back to like your Dukes of Hazzard example, top law officer, the guy that has probably more power than anybody else in the county of Chickasaw County. Right? Sheriff Little. Yeah. White guy, right? No. No. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Sheriff Big Ed Little. So, but you know, this is what they do. They take one thing, they focus on it, and they use that as a reason to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, it was the South in the 80s, and people had Confederate flags everywhere. Quite frankly, they still do. Yeah, and frankly, they still do. But you got to understand how Southerners see that. They don't see that as a symbol of racism. No, they see it as something handed down from their that relatives fought for. It's part of their history. The way we in the North may see something different. Right. It's a culture thing, right? And now, I thought we were supposed to have multiculturalism. How come we can't? I just. Well, and that's it. I mean, if you live in Moorhead, Minnesota, and you're flying a Confederate flag, and you're not from the South, there might be an issue with that. That takes on a different meaning. Yeah. But I mean, they're talking about this. I know it's Stone Mountain, Georgia. There was a story in the news about them considering that they've got those. They were the Klan used to the carvings that are in the stone, and they want to talk about getting rid of those. Stone Mountain Park. Yeah. Well, when we whitewash history, we forget it, and then we tend to go back and do those things again. I mean, just look at how we have so cheapened the word Nazi. Yeah. By calling everybody a Nazi that we disagree with, that we're actually systematically going back now and starting to move into infanticide and eugenics and think that that's an okay thing to do, and when it's no different than what Goebbels did. No, they put they're putting a different label on it now. Yeah. Eugenics, the way the Nazis did it, isn't much different than the way some people have proposed.
No, I mean, they were killing, kids that had Down syndrome and
adults too. I mean,
absolutely.
And you've heard the population control arguments. We've cheapened the word racist so that anybody who disagrees with a position on an issue is automatically deemed a racist.
Right.
I mean, in fact, you're deemed a racist just by stating facts. I mean, one of the things that I have often talked about with problems in the minority community is the disillusion of the family.
Yeah.
And how black leaders have no ideas as to how to solve these problems. You look at the common denominators, and this really goes through all races, to be honest with you, but in the black community, I think it's where it's the most obvious. Single-parent homes, people not graduating from high school, and getting involved in drugs and gangs. Now, those things are colorblind.
Yeah.
Okay, but in the black community, it's destroyed entire neighborhoods. And you listen to these black leaders, and they don't have a clue as to what to do about it. Their answer to that is to call you a racist.
Well, some.
Well, I would argue most. I mean,
there's a lot more on the conservative side than there used to be, and I don't find that they're doing that.
But I don't either. But I think that if you can't honestly talk about what the problems are, you're never going to solve them.
Right.
I mean, what's happened is the black families have been destroyed over generations by government, by public housing. It's well-intentioned, but it's had the opposite effect of what it was supposed to be. And when we talk about real solutions, if we can't have an honest conversation about it without being called a racist, all we're going to do is recycle the same people in poverty over and over and over again. And that's what's happened for the last 3 generations, is that ever since the 60s, this is what we've done.
Yeah.
But, look at the inner cities. I mean, they're hopeless.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but they may as well become independent countries. I mean, it's
well, look at who leads them, though. I mean, you look at these inner cities.
You're getting who you vote for.
Yeah. And they've had no solutions for the past how many decades, and you keep putting the same people or people with the same ideologies or even worse in,
Actually, it's gotten worse and worse and worse with the ideologies. Look at New York.
Oh,
I mean, it's gotten, de Blasio is far more left than when Ed Koch or when John Lindley or anybody else was, even Bloomberg, who was whack job left.
Yeah.
But, I mean, de Blasio is off the charts left.
Yeah.
You talk to Rahm Emanuel out in Chicago. He hasn't solved a problem yet.
No.
So, I mean...
And they're not very happy with him, but, I mean, it's...
But they have to be open-minded. And by
Right.
they, I mean citizens of Chicago. I don't mean a certain race or a certain gender or anything like that.
Detroit was becoming a virtual ghost town.
Detroit still is nothing. Think of what that city used to be.
Yeah.
And think of what it is now.
Yeah. It's
So
hurting.
I don't know. This stuff just frustrates me that you can't talk about history honestly.
Right.
And
well, I think there's a negative connotation given to some of this. I didn't see all of the paintings, but I'm looking right now at the one about the Christian that is converting, as they say, some Indians. I don't know that they're necessarily converting. He's converting the Indians. Let me just speak as a Christian. Missions, being a missionary, is a vital part of the Christian faith. Jesus' great commission was go to the ends of the earth, to make disciples, to spread the word of Christianity and tell about Jesus to all of the different nations. That is what he said to do. So I know Christianity is not a popular thing among most people outside of Christianity, and unfortunately some people within Christianity in some factions, but that doesn't take away that proselytizing isn't bad. Forced conversions, that's bad. What happened during the Inquisition, things like that, very bad. Very, 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 very bad.
But that brings up a point. Can't we have Christianity displayed and at the same time respect the First Amendment of remember what the First Amendment says.
Right.
The government cannot interfere in the expression and cannot establish.
Right.
So it's very specific. It's not this gray area that there can be no religion anywhere in something owned by the city of St. Paul.
Right.
That is not. That is precisely the opposite. of what
Congress
the
used to print Bibles.
Yeah. They'd probably get arrested for doing that today. I'd like to see a missionary walk into the Democratic caucus and they
yeah. But I mean, with this picture, I mean, it doesn't look forced to me. It's some guy, like a Franciscan monk or something, standing with a cross and a Bible. And
who says the folks there aren't there of their own free will?
Yeah. It does, that painting says nothing other than, hey, there's a Christian and there's two Indians or two Native Americans or whatever you want to call them.
Whatever they are.
I don't know. I mean, I'm looking at this, and I don't find it offensive. I know they want to say, oh, the missionary is standing over and above, and he's trying to convert the Indians because he's obviously standing over and above, then that's a position of power. Well, no. I mean, that's just, you got to, when you're an artist, you have to use all these spatial elements and you have to fit things and frame things up right.
And I wonder if the artist, I'd like to hear what their,
right.
What did the artist intend here? When we let the offended decide what's offensive, we lose any sense of you have no standards anymore. What's offensive is always changing because now there's the next fight.
Right.
The next fight is to get rid of this sports team's name, or the next fight is to get have "In God We Trust" taken off of our coins. Or there's always another fight. It's never far enough.
Right. It's that. It's like the whole deal that was in the news with the Covington group that was at the March for Life rally in D.C. And how things went down there with the radical African American group and the Native American
fitting the
Phillips.
It was just fitting the media's depiction. The media put out with the story as they wanted it to go. Right. And that's ultimately what some people bought hook, line, and sinker.
They used racism in a way that really the only racists were the black nationalist Hebrews.
Right. But in some people's minds, only white Christians can be racists.
Right.
Nobody else can be.
Right.
So if you're of that ilk, nothing you can do to convince them that, anything's going to change on that front.
Right.
So
we're not going to solve it here, unfortunately.
Well, we could if everybody would just listen to us.
Well, there is that. So yeah, they
can move those murals into my house.
So yeah, that's that story. They're not taking them down. They're just going to hide them behind other murals.
They could claim one as Elizabeth Warren. Couldn't they do that?
I don't know. It's not holding a beer.
Oh. So. Harvard's first minority professor.
Oh, what is this world coming to, Andrew? Let's just move on. So St. Paul, you got your problems, just like many other places. We're going to talk today about how government ruins sports. There's a group called the Minnesota Sports Facilities Authority, and they're just a bundle of fun. Chances are you didn't even know that this group existed, or if you did, that they are in charge of doing everything that they do, that they own what they own, that they manage what they manage. Why don't we? Let's talk a little bit about the history, because this goes back.
Okay, I'm going to give you the short and condensed version of this, because I could go on about this for hours and I won't. Again, our audience is smart; they can read.
Right, and if you think you're going to tune out because you hate sports, You know what you also hate? Paying taxes on
just
stuff that it's going to get good, trust me.
And who is in charge of something and how they got there and who's appointed and who's elected and so on and so forth, and governments creating pseudo-governments. You and I talk about that all the time. This is kind of another one of those, but it's going to take a little bit to get to it.
Right.
So everybody just stick with us on this. The whole cities I think what would surprise a lot of people, and we're going to use baseball as the main sport here, but you could pretty much use this with almost any sport of the major sports.
Right.
That I'm going to use baseball because it's the richest in history, and you have the most examples. It's gone through the most changes. It's gone through the, I think the NBA was on CB radio in the 70s. Very different than it is now. Baseball, that's my passion. Baseball history, not necessarily baseball today. But from 1903 to 1953, the major leagues had 16 teams, and they were played in only, I believe, 11 cities. Nothing west of St. Louis, at that time.
Right.
The St. Louis Browns and the St. Louis Cardinals, which shared Sportsman's Park, which was actually owned by the Browns, but the Cardinals had all the money because Anheuser-Busch owned the Cards. Gussie Busch, the original, owned the Cardinals. Now, during that time, prior to that, almost all stadiums, in fact, all stadiums in baseball were owned by the teams. They built them, they operated them, they maintained them. In many cases, they were named after the owner.
Right.
Comiskey Park, Scheib Park in Philadelphia. Some of them weren't. Yankee Stadium, it was built by Jake Rupert, who was the owner that he was a former congressman, actually, that where the Yankees got really good under him. But he was a brewer, and he was during Prohibition, so the Yankees became his brewery, if you will. But Powell Crosley, who bought the Reds, Cincinnati Reds actually went bankrupt. A lot of people don't know this, but they actually declared bankruptcy, and a man named Powell Crosley bought them and created Crosley Field, which was in Cincinnati prior to Riverfront Stadium. And a lot of that changed after World War II. After World War II, there was a boom in television. There was a boom in aviation. There was it was a different post-war. You went from the Great Depression to post-World War II. It's like two different worlds. It was really a big change. If you grew up in the 30s and you became an adult in the 50s, the 30s were an awful decade.
Right.
You could, the Depression, the Dust Bowl, the unemployment. I'd add the New Deal.
Yep.
You could go on and whatever you want. But in 1950, the city of Milwaukee, Milwaukee of all cities, decided to build a stadium in the hopes of attracting a major league ball club. County Stadium, which it was named County Stadium,
right?
Which the Brewers played in later, but the Boston Braves in 1953, who were always second-class citizens to the Red Sox,
right?
Decided to up and move to Milwaukee, and it was a huge success, attendance-wise, and so on and so forth. So other cities started to copy this. One of them was Minneapolis.
Yes.
And there were other ones, too. Texas, Arlington.
Yep.
It was the city of Arlington that built the original Arlington ballpark. I'll get into that story in a second, because they took the second Washington Senators team after we took the first.
Right.
And of course the Dodgers moving with Chavez Ravine out in California. But so it was a novel concept that I don't know if novel's the right word, that a city would build a park and they would be the owners and operators of it. One of the reasons that no franchises moved was you had to build a stadium. You can't just up and leave, I mean, you've got to build a park, you've got to acquire the land, this is back when you didn't get tax increment financing for coming in. Cities didn't do that. So the Chamber of Commerce here in Minnesota, or in Minneapolis, because one of the strange things about old Metropolitan Stadium was it was owned by Minneapolis originally, even though it was in Bloomington. And I think that the reason for that was that it was not seen as viable to tear everything down in Minneapolis and put a stadium downtown. Today they do it with eminent domain and with transit and with tax abatements. They tear anything down and use that as you can create a tax revitalization zone and do those things. But you didn't do that in the 1950s. No, Bloomington had the land.
Yes.
And so the Chamber of Commerce is the one that came up and raised private funds to purchase that land and build Metropolitan Stadium on it. Now, the Minneapolis Millers, who played at Old Nicollet Park downtown prior to that, were the team that moved in there. But it was built to attract a major league franchise. And here's the little tidbit of story. Is that the New York Giants were the Millers were their affiliate. And the Giants were the team that Minnesota was trying to get here. But one of the things that happened, again, this is unnecessary, I'm just saying this because I'm a fountain of useless facts, is that the National League, when the Dodgers wanted to move to Los Angeles, I don't think we're going to approve only one team moving out there.
Yeah. Because
commercial aviation was in its infancy, that they had to have a team go with the Dodgers. And I think that's how because that's how the Giants ended up in San Francisco. They played at Seals Park, which was in the Pacific Coast League, and then it was on the condition that they build Candlestick Park. So the Minnesota lost out on the Giants. That was the team they were trying to get here.
Yeah.
And, like I said, baseball at that time was kind of a family business. It was not part of some conglomerate like it is now, the way all sports teams are. They're bought by some rich guy who's, it's 1/10 of their net worth, and they've got, 50 other businesses going. Baseball was really not operated like that.
Right.
And another team was the Washington Senators. Clark Griffith was not a wealthy man. Calvin, the one who moved here, was not a wealthy man either. And they saw a pot of gold out in Minnesota, and we ended up getting the original Washington Senators.
Yes,
and the Washington got an expansion team. Now, how bad was that?
I know.
Right when we started getting good, because if you look at 1965, Jim Cott and Harmon Killebrew, and they were all there in the Senators.
Oh, yeah.
Right at the end. So finally, when a decent park was, or decent team was being built up, when they moved the team. But, strangely, the city of Minneapolis owned and operated Metropolitan Stadium. And I don't know how it worked, how the Twins got a cut of this and that. I can't find financial documents that show. You know how it is in cities, Jay, when they have what you'd call an amenity. It's very hard to see where your tax dollars are going in and out,
right,
and who's taking what. It still is that way, I would argue. And we'll get into U.S. Bank Stadium and Target Field and who's operating them. And you look at they're actually acts of the legislature.
Yeah.
And this is the little known thing is that. So anyhow, and then of course the Vikings moved in too. Sports at that time was not bringing in the revenue to make single stadiums viable. Baseball and football teams had to share stadiums at that time.
Right.
A lot of people don't know that the Lions played at Tiger Stadium before the Silverdome. The New York Giants football team played at Yankee Stadium before they moved. Actually, they play in New Jersey, actually, not New York.
Yes.
And the Bears actually played at Wrigley Field for a while.
Yes, they did.
Pretty small playing at. There wasn't much room in the end zones. No. But Metropolitan Stadium, again, at that time was owned by the city of Minneapolis. But a lot of things changed over the 70s and 80s. The AFL-NFL merger came in and declared certain stadiums too small for their expansion.
Right.
They had built a second deck out in left field to accommodate the Vikings to get up to NFL standards. But ultimately, the fate of the old Met was the Vikings could have moved to the Gopher Stadium, the Brick House.
Right.
Even though that was pretty dilapidated. That actually was more of an NFL stadium than Metropolitan Stadium was at the time.
Wow.
If you looked at their standards of seating and even amenities were probably better there than they were at Metro, because it was a baseball park. It was just, it was, they didn't have the room out. If you looked at the old Met, the end zones were like, you could crash into the left field fence and stuff. So, I mean, it was not the best place for football, though I think the elements helped them. So in 1977, the legislature created what's called the the Metropolitan Sports Facilities Commission, which has been replaced today. Okay. But that was created in 1977 by an act of the legislature. And they were in charge of a new stadium for the Twins and the Vikings and eventually the Gophers. Huh. I don't think the Gophers were originally envisioned to go into the Metrodome. But they were in charge of and they took over the day-to-day operations of Metropolitan Stadium from the city of Minneapolis. And there are various conspiracy theories about that. One of them is that they deliberately didn't maintain the ballpark to make a new... the old Met had 3 decks behind home plate, and the third deck was actually cordoned off in the last year and a half of the stadium because of all the broken railings and broken seats. It could not pass a code inspection, so it was actually cordoned off. That would be behind home plate down the lines a little bit, but they were like they had like police yellow tape around them. You couldn't go through.
That's why the Beatles never came back and played Met Stadium again, right?
Yeah. When did they come? The mid '60s, I'm sure.
Like
yes, it had to be. So the Metrodome became the new thing that they became in charge of.
Which, other than like sound, like the volume during Vikings games, it is really one of the worst stadiums ever.
Or
considered.
Twins games. I mean,
that too.
That'd be the other thing. I do wonder if the Twins would have ever won a World Series had they not had the Metrodome.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe, maybe not. I never thought the Dome was that bad till I watched a game at a different park. Then I realized how horrible my childhood had been. So you had this Sports Facilities Commission, which was appointed by the Minneapolis City Council and the governor.
Yes.
So again, you have an appointed. The legislature creates another, I don't want to call it branch of government, or another government entity, we'll call it.
Yes.
And they are now operating millions and millions of dollars, especially later. Not so much then, but way more now.
Yes.
They oversaw the construction of the Metrodome, the tax dollars that were brought in by the hotel and alcohol taxes, which, by the way, are still in place. I think the Metrodome's gone now, but we're still paying the taxes on it. So, just an interesting, thing that they're. I should also say that the Metropolitan Sports Facilities Commission also owned and operated Met Center, which was where the North Stars played, right next to the present-day Mall of America is there now. I think the IKEA is the old Met Center, but it was also owned and operated by the Sports Facilities Commission. So also the hockey stadium as well. So they became the owners and operators of the Metrodome. They oversaw the construction. They took care of the day-to-day business operations. So I don't know but again, the details are hard to figure out because if I'm hired as a vendor there, do I work for the Twins? Do you work for the Facilities Commission? Am I hired by the Metrodome? Is that, who was in charge of all that? Are they responsible for charging $12 for a hot dog?
Well, I suppose. I don't know. But so you're telling me that Minneapolis, along, the governor and Minneapolis appointed this board, and the board then oversees all of this stuff, and they run the day-to-day, but there's really no clear window into, there's no transparency. Surprise, surprise.
No, and
we should say for our people at home, there is a website. You can go to www.msfa.
Okay, I got to say something about that, though.
Yes,
that's the new one.
That's the new one.
The new that was created in 2012. A little known part of the Viking Stadium legislation was it got rid of this old committee and created a new one. So now we have a second that only operates U.S. Bank Stadium. They don't operate Target Center. That's owned by the city of Minneapolis.
Yeah,
and the Twins, when they moved into Target Field, they created a Ballpark Authority Commission that is also appointed. The former Speaker of the House, Margaret Kelleher Anderson Kelleher, she is the chair of that.
Oh, that sounds fair and delightful.
Well, you quit politics and you get a job
in politics.
You get a cushy job doing. Either you become a lobbyist or you become one of these. So, but the Facilities Commission ended in 2012. It was considered defunct, but they did own and operate. They also oversaw the demolition of the Metrodome as well. So, and the Sports Facilities Authority is done a little bit differently. Okay. They have 3 members appointed. They have only 5 members on it, not 7. 3 are appointed by the governor, and 2 are appointed by the mayor of Minneapolis. So not the city council anymore. It's 5 people, and are appointed by 2 people. And I don't think I don't know if they're subject to any sort of confirmation. I don't think so.
Wow.
So so the mayor gets their choices also. Of course, there was the controversy back in 2017 where a couple of people, Ted Mondale being one, had to resign because of favors given to suites to members of the Democratic Party. And,
go figure.
Yeah, we couldn't. And I'll tell you what. There's a whole thing. If you go to, you mentioned msfa.com.
Yes.
If you go there, they have entire reports. They have board meetings with minutes. They do have that. But they have equity programs. It's the same stuff you're going to see over and over and over.
Right.
They do have financial reports. However, they're very incomplete. When you would say it's impossible to discern what percentage of the money goes to the team, what I don't believe that all they claim that they're taking in. I don't understand where all the ticket income goes and that kind of stuff. It's very strange. These financial documents, they're only like 5 pages long. They're not very long. It's not 200 pages to sift through like a city, but I would argue that I checked the auditor's office too, and I can't find an audited report on the this new group, this Sports Facilities Authority.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of money that goes through, these groups. And I'll tell you, the Ballpark Authority has whole pages on LEED standards, sustainability.
You don't say.
Yeah, so on and so forth. Hennepin County, which had a big say in the Twins ballpark. They used eminent domain to get some of the land that was used to build the stadium and so on.
Yeah.
Your local. I mean, everybody talks about this being a state fight, but really, appointed commissions and local governments have got their hands way more into stadiums than states do.
Oh yeah,
they're not even close. And one of the things that happened in sports is now tax-funded stadiums or some sort of conglomerate of that is now the norm.
Right.
I mean, I can't think of the last stadium, quote unquote, that was built 100% by a team. I mean, you name it,
yeah. What you're telling me is that Ziggy Wilf isn't there after the Vikings games, like sweeping out the aisles and the.
I don't think he's doing that. No,
okay.
I don't know if Ziggy would know a broom unless somebody grabbed it and flew away. So these sports authorities, the ballpark authority, also has its own website. Let me look that up real quick.
Yeah, well, it's amazing, that there is. Well, it's not that amazing that there's so much government.
Ballparkauthority.com.
Ballparkauthority.com. There you go. That there's so much government in what is supposed to be. I mean, there is an owner to these teams.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a private business. It is not a public business unless you're the Green Bay Packers. I don't know of another one like that. There might be, but
I don't think so.
It is a private business. And, but because they want to take the subsidies, because they want to have government help them with eminent domain and things like that to put the stadiums exactly where they want them, and there's all this zoning and all this interference that it gives the cities the leeway to be able to set these commissions up and have say-so and really ownership over where these private businesses conduct business.
And keep in mind, it's a windfall. You and I always talk about when business and government get together, we the people are the loser.
Yeah.
When you look at a place like Target Field, the Pollad family, who takes a lot of grief, I think some of it is unfounded. But some of it's founded, some of it's not.
Have we won a World Series since '91?
No, but
then it's all just.
Well, when Calvin Griffith owned the team, we were basically the Beverly Hillbillies.
Oh, that's true.
Carl Pohlad bought the team. We at least became professional. I don't think it's a coincidence that we won the World Series 3 years later.
Right.
But and maybe Carl not being there is part of it too. But it's a sweet deal for them because they don't have to pay for upkeep of the stadium. Upkeep of the stadium is on a separate, I think. I mean, again, it's impossible to sift through this and figure out what the Twins are paying for, what they're on the hook for. If they don't own and operate the stadium, that they signed a 30-year lease.
They did, yeah.
So technically, once that lease is up, they are. I mean, I'll tell you a short baseball story on this. One of the person who popularized that was a man named Arnold Johnson. He bought the St. Louis Browns, he bought the Philadelphia A's from Connie Mack's sons and moved them to Kansas City. He owned the ballpark called Blues Stadium. It was a minor league ballpark. The Negro Leagues had played there, the Kansas City Monarchs. Buck O'Neill, the great black player, was a big star back in the 30s. And what he did was he took Blues Stadium, sold it to the city of Kansas City, who renamed it Kansas City Municipal Stadium, and he signed a lease and paid them rent. And he was the first one to do that, to get out of, and he died right after that. But when Charlie Finley bought the team, and that lease, one of those leases was up, he up and left and moved the A's to Oakland.
Right.
So, but I mean, the Twins sign a 30-year lease, and after that, we take a bath on it for all we know.
Right.
They could demand a new stadium. They could get up and move.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that hanging over our heads too. And I should also say these cities are using these stadiums as excuses to tear everything down and rebuild it all.
Oh, yeah.
That's another
everything
concept.
Around it,
That's another, like we mentioned at the beginning, how did the Twins end up in Bloomington? Well, that was where the land was.
Right.
We all know today, no. We want high density. We want transit.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way they'd have that transit hub there without Target Field and Target Center. Right next to each other. I mean, there's no way that would exist. The Twins helped subsidize North Star commuter rail.
Yeah.
So there's that on top of it. So it really is a sweetheart deal for both sides. Because whether the city loses or makes money operating the stadium, they can use that as an excuse to tear everything down and take more tax dollars from everything around it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a total scam, backwards and forwards.
Of course it is.
Yeah. So I know that's depressing, but I mean, I go back to some of the other cities. Cleveland would be a city that comes to my mind when they built. I can't remember what the stadium's called now. Jacobs Field then.
Mm-hmm.
For the Indians, and I think it's called Progressive Field now.
I think so, yeah.
And what was then called Gund Arena, now it's called Quicken Loans Arena. That was part of an entire downtown that basically got demolished and rebuilt by the city. Kind of right by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is down by there.
Yeah.
So they basically took ownership of both parks and pretty much just tore everything down and rebuilt what they wanted in downtown Cleveland now.
Right.
So,
well, I mean, we see that everywhere. I mean, even at a smaller scale, the development is determined by the stadiums that go in. I mean, even if you look at where the St. Paul Saints are at, the development that has gone up around that new stadium.
The old warehouse district, yeah.
Yes.
Well, and keep in mind, I mean, that was another, that was a bond that was floated.
Right.
We still owe money on that at a state level. We're still servicing the debt on CHS Field, and we will be for some time now.
Mm-hmm.
That was, and again, I'm not even sure who owns that technically.
Yeah.
I might as well look it up since I didn't even. I didn't even think of that, but that's a relatively new park as well. It happened to be built right on the Lower East Side there, where the light rail ends.
Yeah.
Central. That's where that ends right there, and I'm sure that's just a coincidence, right? That
of course, of course.
It doesn't. City of St. Paul is the owner of.
Well, see, so your cities are the ones that own these sports stadiums. They are the ones that write the bonds. They are the ones that keep the bonds going ad infinitum. I mean, really, once they're paid back, I mean, you're still paying money. The taxes that they put on you they don't go away when the bond is paid off.
No, the Hennepin County tax is still there.
Mm-hmm.
The liquor and hotel taxes are still there. There was the bonds to the Metrodome. I believe it was 1993. I think they were 15-year bonds.
Yeah,
and they were paid off then. And of course, the Metrodome it's no longer there, but we're still paying the taxes. So these cities are operating ballparks. These appointed commissions are doing the day-to-day operations of them, and it's kind of become a sweetheart deal for both teams or for both sides.
Right.
And ultimately, we the taxpayer are the ones, that are left holding the bag for it.
Yeah.
So, in fact, I wonder what the Twins' payment is to Target Field in a year.
You mean their financial documents aren't super clear? And easy to understand.
Go to that Ballpark Authority website and tell me if you can tell me what the Twins' payment is. I've been looking at it for a few days now.
Yeah.
Go to U.S. Bank and tell me what Ziggy Wolf is paying the Sports Facilities Authority.
I don't know if I can.
Tell me his percentage of who owns the parking ramps and things like that. I mean, it's very sketchy, and but this concept of government and sports teams we can all blame Milwaukee. We can blame Wisconsin for this.
Yeah.
Blame Milwaukee for this. Although some city would have done it. I mean, some city would have done it.
Well, I mean, it does go back a long ways. I mean, even in smaller places. I mean, I don't know how much you know about like Wade Stadium in Duluth, where the Duluth Dukes played, Duluth White Sox and stuff before that.
There's still a team playing there now in Northern Association or something.
The
college team
Duluth
plays
Huskies.
Yeah, okay.
And I think St. Scholastica, my alma mater, plays there. I had played there when I was in the Moose League.
Really?
Yeah. That was actually built by the WPA during the Depression.
Really?
Yeah.
Wade Stadium goes back that far?
Yeah, 1941.
Oh, wow. How about old Midway? Who built that?
I don't know.
Midway Stadium.
I don't know, but I mean, being a WPA building, I mean that's directly out of FDR.
Well, that's a federal thing.
That's a federal building. I mean, it was fun to play there. Don't get me wrong. I loved it.
Yeah,
Every time I got to play a game there. But, yeah. And who owns that now? Because there are these teams that still play at this place.
Who knows?
Duluth Citywide All Sports Committee, it looks like.
So there's another committee there. Midway was owned by the city of St. Paul.
Yeah.
So they built that, tore it down, and built a new one.
So it's a huge scam. I mean, when you're thinking about it, I mean, do these places ever need upgrades? Sure, but should a government entity be owning these facilities, and then when they reach kind of their end of life cycle, tear them down, put up a new one, implement a new tax? Old tax doesn't go away, but they implement the new tax on top of the old tax, and you're just stuck now paying two taxes. And then when we get out to the end of 30 years on U.S. Bank Stadium and they want a new stadium, are we going to be then paying the Metrodome tax, the U.S. Bank Stadium tax, and the new tax?
Yes. Well, it depends how long the bonds go for.
Right.
The debt service is really where you're really getting hit hard, particularly the city.
Yeah.
You can't slough that off on people coming to the stadium or something like that. I mean, that's ultimately a budget item that, and it affects your ability to borrow anywhere else as well.
Right.
Not that you should, but, but yeah, I mean, and you look at, I wonder, like, all these, Jay, let me ask you this. I mean,
yes.
What do you say to somebody who says, we built U.S. Bank Stadium. It brought the Super Bowl here. It brought the Final Four here. And bringing that business here, and maybe it'll bring something else, or WrestleMania or something.
Yeah,
that outweighs the cost of this. That it makes it worth it because we're able to basically do the same thing. We're basically recruiting somebody else to come here with our new stadium. I mean, how do you combat that argument? Because that's what I always hear in return, that if the Vikings get up and leave, that costs us jobs, that costs us... But you could argue that about any business.
For a one-time event, I mean, you're going to hire all these people and then let them go anyways. It's not sustainable business.
Yeah.
If you're going to hire a bunch of people. I mean, take a look at... We always talk about all these jobs saved or made, under the Obama administration.
Yeah, I never heard about jobs saved before.
Right. But think about it, and it was all these shovel-ready projects, and what happens when the project is done? Have you really created a job? What happens when the event is done? Have you really created a job? You've got a great business, like monetary landfall for these companies that surround the area, and I don't know. I mean, you bring that in, that's good for business, that's good for business owners, that's good for employees. Rising tide floats all boats, right? But you have to have the kind of business environment that is positive for businesses 365 days a year, no matter if there's a convention in town or not, no matter if there's a WrestleMania in town or not.
So why do they try to recruit them so heavily? I mean, why does it matter if the Final Four comes here then?
Well, I think we should try to recruit those things to come here. It's good for business. But to use that as a pretext to build a new building that saddles us with a new tax forever, is that really worth it? Or, should that be handled by business or by the business owners that own that team that plays in that stadium?
Yeah, but unfortunately, there isn't a stadium anymore where tax dollars don't trade hands.
Right.
If Minneapolis doesn't do it, some other city will.
Right.
Although we're running out of cities.
Well, that's
I don't know
true.
I don't know where you can expand anymore. I mean, if you want to create an NFL franchise, $5 billion is probably the over-under.
Right.
Because you'd have to build a stadium with all the amenities, with all the latest crap.
Yeah, I mean, maybe.
You'd have to have a fan base.
Unless, you're going in infilling where, you send somebody out to San Diego or you go and send somebody out to Oakland or,
Agreed.
That's probably the first places that they would go.
Probably where they've been before.
Yeah, because, they had to build a new stadium in Las Vegas for when the Raiders move out there.
Las Vegas Raiders.
Yeah, I know.
I don't understand it.
I think they need to probably rename that team, but I'm still mad that they didn't call Houston Texans the Houston Oilers, and I don't
understand that either.
Yeah, well, oil is
Cleveland Browns got a second bite at the apple.
They sure did.
I don't understand that either. It makes no sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, and you see it in other sports too. I mean, we saw it. I mean, who runs the XL Energy Center? How did that?
It's not XL Energy.
Yeah.
And it's not the Minnesota Wild.
Rights. But I mean, before that, it was the St. Paul Civic Center, which was owned and operated by the city of St. Paul. I mean, they built an arena, and but let me ask this question: Is building an arena like a 15,000 seat arena, is that a smart thing for a big city to do? Because you could make the argument with concerts and that you have to have some kind of venue.
And that's just it. I mean, they use concerts, the Shrine Circus, the Ice Capades, the
Do these
Westminster
things make a
Dog
profit?
Show.
I mean, that's, yeah. Do these things make, if they did, would the private world do it?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question, and with how transparent these financial documents aren't.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, what do you do? I don't know, because it's not clear.
To me, this sounds like the argument that we talk about all the time about a city building a pool. Then they want to build an auditorium. Then they want to build an amphitheater. Then they want to build a hockey rink. Then they got to keep up with the city next to them. I mean, is that part of what's going on here too? So-and-so got a new stadium, so now we need one. So-and-so got an NFL franchise. If we want one, we have to do this. So-and-so got, a franchise to move there, so our team doesn't move. We have to.
Right.
One of the things about baseball history, I think a lot of people would be surprised to know that in the 50s and 60s, practically every team in the majors, probably with the exception of the Yankees, Red Sox, and Cardinals, discussed or came close to moving. The Cleveland Indians came close to moving. Chicago White Sox came close to moving. I mean, it was all this pot of gold somewhere else that somebody else was selling them.
Right.
So where does this end? I guess is my question. I mean, how many more stadiums can you build with how many more luxury boxes?
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, you look at these stadiums, and you build one for each major franchise, but then, you also have you have like the Olympics. I mean, even think about that when, all these cities vie to get the Olympics. And like the 2016 Rio Olympics cost over $13 billion.
Cost who?
Well, and that's the thing. Taxpayers do pay some of that bill. They pay a good portion of it. I'm looking at something on Investopedia here where it says that for the 2012 London Games, taxpayers were responsible for $4.4 billion of the costs.
And what would those costs be? Would that be security? Would that be stadium upgrades?
Yeah,
Would that be
all of that.
New hotels, public transit subsidies. I mean, what, or all of the above?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, all of the above. I mean, the cities are responsible for a good portion of that.
And again,
they go in debt to do it.
Olympics have their own committee appointed by who the hell knows who.
And they're tied in with,
world stuff.
All the world stuff and the climate change, UN stuff. And it's...
Where's all that money going? I'd love to see where the hell that money's gone.
Yeah.
How many euros are going to that? They can go buy Greek bonds with them, maybe.
Yeah.
So what a mess. I mean, what a mess. I mean, and the thing is because I'm a sports fan and because I do go to these venues, but I'll tell you what, it's tough knowing. I guess my attitude is if I'm paying for it, I'm going to enjoy it. Mm-hmm. It's just I know that.
I guess.
I don't know what else to do. I can sit and complain about it, but it's there. I don't see an end to this I don't see this ever ending.
No, probably not, because look at who gets elected in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and unless you see that changing sometime in the near future.
Yeah, the same people who talk about inequity and the same people who talk about the little guy and affordable housing are the same people in bed with Ziggy Wilf and Glenn Taylor and the Pohlad family,
putting in regressive taxes, that hurt the poorest,
and the bonding, which of course, who pays off that debt? It's the citizens of Minneapolis who do that. So talk about BS. I mean, talk about hypocrites.
That's exactly it. It's easy when you're in politics to talk out of both sides of your mouth because, everybody loves sports. So people won't complain. Most people won't complain too much about spending money on sports. Not everybody loves guns. So it's easy it goes on and on and on and on. And you can say one thing here and you can say another thing in another venue, but most people don't love the light rail, and so they complain about the taxes on that, and so they go with a little slower approach, or they wait it out. They try to make it happen over time versus just, hey, we're putting in a new sales tax so that we can bond to make the stadium happen.
City of St. Paul, by the way, owns the XL Energy Center.
Of course it does. Yep. That's not a surprise.
Coincidence it was built where the Civic Center used to be?
No.
I'm sure that's just...
No, it's...
I'm sure that's a coincidence, too.
So how do you change this? Because, we're talking about big cities that are run by one party. They have one party rule. They have for a long time. They probably will continue to long into the future. Probably the real answer is get out. But in case you do love your city and you want to fight it, in these big cities, you almost have to start out small, and you got to get your neighbors together. And a lot of them have these neighborhood committees. Get on a neighborhood committee, work your way up to the top of that. Get onto an advisory commission then at the city, whether that's Parks and Rec or zoning.
Minneapolis and St. Paul do have those city committees, I think they're called.
Yep, and so you work your way into that, and maybe at some point you do stand a shot, as long as you're not self-identifying and you can stay independent. I don't know what the answer is, but the answer is not to keep doing what we're doing. it's hard because people get afraid they're going to lose their sports team. They want a new venue. We don't want to lose them. Unfortunately, I think the risk that you've got to be willing to take, and hopefully in the end that, when it's hard to wean somebody off of free money when they're used to getting it. And it's no different from Target Corporation in Brooklyn Park than it is to the Twins downtown Minneapolis. And so when you have somebody else that is providing for the building, the facilities that you use to run your businesses in, what do you do?
Well, and I think that you could take this on a smaller scale. I mean, there's civic centers in St. Cloud, Rochester, Duluth.
Oh.
There's amphitheaters and auditoriums at other cities that are smaller. There's hockey rinks and community centers, and one has to scrutinize those things. One has to understand how they're financed, understand that these things don't make money.
Right.
And you are left holding the bag, period. Now,
if you're willing to do that, that's fine.
Well, and I mean, is there one of the things about the Twins Stadium was Minnesota law said that Hennepin County residents were entitled to a vote.
Right.
And they actually passed a special law that revoked that in the case of Target fee. I mean, again,
isn't that nice?
Again, whatever you think of the state, forget that for a minute.
It's the principles that are at play here.
We should have had a vote as to whether anytime there was a special tax. Remember, they had a vote in St. Paul about this when Norm Coleman was the mayor.
Yeah.
And it got defeated. I don't recall what year that was, but it got voted down before he was a senator, and he was still the mayor over there. So late 90s, I want to say. And the referendum went down. And Minnesota law, because there was a special tax being created, required a referendum. And they got rid of that. That is still the law today.
Yeah.
But they made an exception. They made it a temporary exception so they didn't have the votes to pass this without that. So those, again, are more shenanigans. There was lobbying by Hennepin County and everybody else, the light rail folks, and you name it, to get that special exception in the works.
Yeah.
So corruption everywhere. But yeah, I mean, Wade didn't even think of something like that. I mean, it's a great thing on a smaller scale to see these things. I mean, you've got teams in the league that the Saints play. You've got minor league teams, independent teams in other sports.
The Toledo Mud Hens are probably my favorite, but yes.
Corporal Klinger from Toledo. There's just the business and government getting together it is such a mess and just a disease. And I don't see an end to it. I think unless one of the two entities is willing to do away with it, I don't see it changing.
Right.
So,
and maybe that's something. I don't know. I don't know how you wean off of the corporate welfare when you're a sports team, and maybe that's something the leagues need to take a look at. And hey, these teams are vital parts of the communities that they reside in. It's not okay just to pull up roots and go, because these teams are managed by the NFL or the NHL or the NBA, and so
there are some exceptions to that depending on the sport.
Right.
Different leagues have a different threshold as to where a franchise can shift or move.
Yeah.
So there's that too. I think there's 75% in the NFL has to approve of a franchise shift to a different city or something like that.
Which, I mean, I think that they all probably would, just because it'd be like, well, what if I want to move? What if my city won't play ball?
I mean, it's how the Cleveland Browns moved.
Yeah.
It was around that time where everybody notice how every team got a new stadium since. I mean, it was okay. The old Cleveland Stadium, Baltimore was willing to front one. Cleveland wasn't. all the owners are like, well, Art Modell got picked up and moved. Now it's time for me to look at my lease. When's that up?
Yep.
So they're not going to block. I mean, if you're hoping the league is going to block, the league would have to has to change the rules.
Yeah.
That's what has to happen. But they're not going to block 1 out of 32 owners from moving.
No. They need to set up stricter standards, I think, and realize that these teams are vital parts of the communities. I mean, look at what the Saints did for New Orleans.
And respect the
Katrina.
Taxpayers.
Yeah.
Respect the taxpayers.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, they are. And they are, at the same time, I don't quite buy the argument that, that they bring in all these jobs and stuff. Like you said, I think that that's temporary. I think that, if the Cleveland Browns owned a car dealership and they got up and moved to Baltimore, no one would have batted an eye.
No.
It's the fact that it's a football team that changes everything.
Absolutely. It's emotional.
Yeah. So there's an unequal treatment of business here.
Yeah.
And that's the Vikings might get up. Well, what about all the businesses that already are? Where are their advocates?
Right.
What about all the taxpayers
There's
who's got up and moved to South Dakota or moved to Texas or moved to Wyoming? What about them? So I mean, there's I get it, but the Vikings aren't the only business here, and Ziggy Wolf can go to the bathroom and blank out the money for whatever he wants. So it's kind of hard to make the case that they're the needy around here. Anyhow,
yes,
you were closing the show, Jay.
Well, there's definitely a lot here to consider. So it's time for you to get on an advisory commission if you have not yet. Think about running for office in the next election, whether that's odd or even year. But you got to start somewhere, and the best place to start is on an advisory commission. So if you see that your city is talking about this stuff, get involved, and we can help you. Tell us about it. Seek out our help if you want to get on a commission. And, we'll tell your story here. I mean, if there's stuff that's going on. So you can get a hold of us at COMMsolutionsMN@gmail.com. That is COMMsolutionsMN@gmail.com. And we will do our best to make sure that your story is known, because it takes... Sometimes light is the best disinfectant, as they say. So if we can shine some light on what your government is doing, we are more than happy to do that. Have us come out and talk to you guys. Whatever it is, we are willing to help, because we are looking for 10,000 people in appointed and elected positions in the state of Minnesota to be able to change the tide that government is going in. So we're going to go away and we're going to figure out another podcast for next week. Well, just into our star chamber and figure out what it is we're going to talk about next week. There we go. We're breaking copyright laws now.
Oh, well, you saying it. Who's the backup quarterback? What was his name? Mike Tomczak?
Yeah, Mike Tomczak.
No. There was another guy, number 4.
Oh, I don't remember. I'm sorry. Anyways, we'll use this as our exit music.
Steve Fuller.
There we go. Steve Fuller.
Where's the fridge?
He's towards the end. For Andrew Richter, Jason Bradley, we're Community Solutions Minnesota. We love you, Minnesota. Now it's your turn to get to work.